And where were you born?
I was born at Stanley Memorial Hospital in Albemarle, North Carolina.
Tell me about the place where you were raised and places you've lived until now.
Okay, so I was born and raised in Albemarle, North Carolina, small town, about 15,000 people, about 30 to 45 minutes northeast of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was raised in kind of an insular black community called Kingville, which is like the southeast quadrant of Albemarle. In that insular community, most of my immediate family, my parents, grandparents, were all born and raised pretty much in that same area. 3 of my 4 grandparents live there now. One lives in New York, and she's been there for years. My whole life, she's lived there. My town, it's a pretty segregated town. There's Highway 52 that runs north-south through my town, and then Main Street, which runs east-west across my town, which splits it primarily into quadrants. And as I said, the most of the black folks in my town live in that southeast quadrant that we call Kingville. Still to this day, I mean, there are folks who are kind of sprinkled across the city a little bit more, but most of them live in that community. The house that my mother lives in now is the house that my great aunt lived in when I was born, and when my grandmother moved to New York, my mom stayed and finished the rest of middle and high school living with my great aunt. We haven't always lived there. There were other points in my early childhood where we lived a couple blocks away. But once my great aunt died when I was in elementary school, we moved back to that house, I think when I was in either late elementary, maybe middle school, and my mom has still lives there now. Kingville's insular black community, lots of churches, not very many businesses, stores, and things like that. The community center that I grew up going to and doing like 4-H camps and arts and crafts camps and playing basketball and flag football and things like that was the segregated Kingville High School, which was a Rosenwald school that my grandparents and my older aunts, uncles, and family members went to, and they still have an alumni association. So I learned a lot about what it means to be black, what it means to be black in the South, and specifically in North Carolina, and like the history and legacy of enslavement, Native American genocide, etc. Because we had field trips and things like that we went on to Town Creek Indian Mound, to Old Salem, which is in Winston-Salem, a Moravian community, some of the first settlers of North Carolina. Those types of things. I remember going to a plantation on a field trip when I was a kid. And so those things kind of, race has shaped a lot of my understanding of who I am, who my community is. But I've always grown up around people who were proud to be black, who were educators. Folks were college educated. My immediate family wasn't college educated, but still learned a lot about what it means to be black, a lot of pride in that community, and folks are proud to be from Albemarle and specifically to be from Kingville.
Thank you. So tell me about your family history. I feel like you touched on it some with your last question, but tell me more about your family history.
So my immediate family, both my parents still live in my hometown. They were never married. My mom was 16 when I was born. My dad was 19. My dad actually was supposed to go to college. He had been accepted to North Carolina A&T and offered a track scholarship. But once they found out that my mom was pregnant, because my dad and his father have kind of had a strained relationship for a lot of his childhood, my dad wanted to be different, to be present, to be more active in my life than what he had with his dad, who he spent summers with. But my grandfather lived in Washington, D.C. for a long while. And so my dad, although he had a relationship, my grandfather wasn't active and present in his life because he lived in, another state. And so my dad, we talk about it quite a bit, where he's like, I felt like I had to do the right thing and take care of family. And so he got a job at this company called Preformed Line Products, and he still works there now. So he's been there for at least 36 years, since I was born. And my dad's a workaholic, in addition to his full-time job in a factory making, various products that, from, the wires that are braided to make power lines, to all of the other components and things that clip on and kind of add on to power lines and things like that, because they work lots of overtime when natural disasters happen. So flooding, tornadoes, hurricanes, lots of those things. My dad worked a lot, and so he was involved in my life, but there were often times where he wasn't present at athletic events or school events and things like that because he was working. And then he also has always had kind of an entrepreneurial spirit where he, has sold incense and oils, and washes people's cars, mows people's lawns. My dad is, or was when I was a kid, in the Nation of Islam, and so I remember going with him. Lots of me spending time with him was like some of his side hustles or side gigs, selling Final Call newspapers, going to deliver incense and oils to some of the barbershops and beauty salons and other businesses and kind of friends and, I guess, patrons, customers that he had who lived not only in my town and in my county, but in Charlotte and Greensboro and Winston-Salem and things like that. My mom graduated high school, and I think she did some part of a program at what is now Stanley Community College, but back then it was called Stanley Technical Community College, or just Stanley Tech. I don't think she completed a program when I was, before I went off to college. But since I graduated from college, she completed a program in something related to computer, kind of office management type of stuff, and tried that out. And I want to say I was done with undergrad by the time she went back and completed a program. I don't remember if it was an associate's or if it was some kind of certificate program, but I think it might have been in a full associate's degree. I have two younger siblings, Jasmine and Onaya. Onaya is a senior at North Carolina A&T. And so we're the only two in the immediate family who have gone off to college, and she should be graduating this year, so she'll be the second kind of college graduate. And I'm really proud of that. I think that I'm 15 years older than she is. And so I think I've hoped that, I could set the tone as the oldest child in like our first gen family, first one to go off to college, that my younger siblings, my kids, other relatives and kids in my hometown would see it as something that they too can do. And then my middle sister, Jasmine, she's married now. She has, I have my first niece who's 5 months old right now. And my sister and her husband just recently, like last weekend, moved to Atlanta from North Carolina. They were living in Charlotte. My grandparents, like I said, 3 of the 4 still live in Albemarle. They didn't go off to college. I know for sure 3 of my 4 grandparents finished high school, but I'm not sure if my mom's dad did or not, but I think that he did. But by the time he got that to high school, he was living in Winston-Salem with his mom and stepdad. Most of my parents' siblings still live in North Carolina, still either in Albemarle or somewhat close by. There's a few who live elsewhere, and then my extended family, lots of people are still there. I have an extended family who have gone off to college, some on athletic scholarships, some on academic scholarships, and others who are, taking out student loans or paying for college. But yeah, so lots of my family are still in that same area, and I've done some genealogical work, and I know that at least going back 8 generations, folks have been either in my immediate area or in adjacent counties, and were enslaved in that area. Some were the children of their slave owners, enslavers, and there's some particular family stories that have been passed down about biracial children of enslaved African descendant women and their white European American enslavers, and some of it's visible in various skin tones of folks. Or when I remember when my great grandmother passed, and there was like a section of like white people who were at the funeral, and I was a kid, I was in 3rd grade, and remember asking my grandmother, like, hey, who are these people that they knew from like work, or who are they? And she's like, oh, that's her people from the Winston-Salem area. And I was like, oh, like we have white people like directly in our family. Yeah, so I mean, I love my family. This is the farthest I've ever lived from my family. I lived in North Carolina until 2015 when I came to Iowa State for the PhD program. I've lived in Winston-Salem, where I went to undergraduate at Wake Forest University. I finished high school actually in Durham at the North Carolina School of Science and Math. And then when my wife was completing her master's, we lived in Chapel Hill in student family housing when she was a master's student at UNC. And then we moved back to Winston-Salem, and then we moved to Ames, Iowa. And it's been an interesting, just lots of regional differences from what I grew up and was socialized to and what I became kind of used to.
Thank you. So I wanted to touch on, go back for just a minute. So when your sister and your mom were in school, did you find yourself as a resource? Were they asking you for advice and things like that?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because with me being so much older than my youngest sister, I failed to mention I have a younger brother. My dad.
Sorry, younger brother.
Right, sorry, Christian. My younger brother is 13 years old, and so he's 22 years younger than I am.
So what grade is that, Nate?
He's an 8th grader.
8th grader.
He's actually 1 month older than my oldest son, James. Which is kind of par for the course in my family. Like the generations are somewhat shifted because my my paternal grandmother was the oldest child and has, siblings that are decades younger than she is. My dad was the oldest, and so one of his aunts is only a couple years older than him, so they were in high school at the same time. And then with me being the oldest, most of the cousins that I grew up with are actually a generation above me, but we're similar aged because of how, I guess, long the generations span. Like, my grandparents were still having kids at the same time that my parents were having kids, and those types of things. So my younger brother, Christian, is 13. He's 22 years younger. My dad got married when I was coming out of college, and actually recently got divorced in the last couple years, and so my younger brother still lives in my hometown. And yeah, so back to your question. So my being so much older than my sister and having had to figure a lot of the college admissions process out on my own or with the help of mentors and people who worked at my schools. I tried to be as much of a resource as I could for my sister. I was working at Wake Forest University when she was in high school, and so I remember helping set up admissions tours and things like that, letting her know, oh, you need to go to this website and schedule an admissions tour, and talking about the importance of the number of touches that you make with the institution if you plan to apply there, talking about scholarships, like walking her and my mom on phone calls or FaceTime calls through completing the FAFSA. I even went as far as when she was a senior, we had lots of conversations about, okay, what kind of schools do you want to go to? What is your ultimate career plan? And she wanted to go to medical school, and so I was talking to her about, I had that same experience being Black from a low income, low resource community. The expectation is that you'll be doctor, lawyer, educator, or business person. And so asking some more invasive questions about, do you actually want to be a doctor? Is it that you want to help people? There are lots of different careers where you can help people. What is it that is attracting you to being a doctor? Is it the patient doctor relationship building piece? Is it the science that you're interested in? Do you like the sight of blood or other kind of things? Are you squeamish? Those types of things, and having those conversations, and telling her go somewhere that has a proven track record of getting their students going on to med school, and their students being prepared to go off to med school without having to do post-bac programs or without having to do a master's degree in some kind of biomedical science, so that you can, take all the classes and be qualified to go to med school. But I went as far as to in having those conversations, I made a Google Doc spreadsheet, a Google Sheet, where what schools are you planning to apply to? And in North Carolina, they have, the Common App, and they have through College Foundation of North Carolina some free application week, I think is what it's called. And talking to her about, just because you're not necessarily interested or a school's not, your top choice, doesn't mean, disregard the opportunity to apply for free or to have your application fees waived, or, we talked about, and I trained as a school counselor. So having some of those conversations, that training actually was really useful in engaging in those conversations. And I think I knew about more resources because of that than I would have if I, just was the older brother who had gone off to college, because my high school didn't do a good job of the counselors. Part of why I actually went into school counseling was because my high school counselor was trash. I think she wouldn't say that. She was a well-intentioned white woman, but I was ranked at the top of my class and found out about lots of opportunities from my peers who were white and who were ranked lower than me, who were taking the same classes as me, who were participating in the same extracurriculars like Quiz Bowl and athletics and things like that. But I was having to find out about summer programs, college visits that were coming to campus, and those types of things, and it left me jaded. And I remember when I went off to the School of Science and Math, coming back, and she tried to take credit, like, oh yeah, Wesley was one of my favorite students, and this, that, and the other. And I remember one of the sessions that I was doing to talk to people about science and math, like saying, like, actually no, part of me finding out about science and math is because I heard it on the announcements. And I went as a sophomore, not even being, actually as a freshman, not being invited because it was supposed to only be for sophomores. But I was so intrigued by hearing the name of this school that I had never heard of that I went, like, let me go and see if I can find out what this is. And then it was my goal, that was my ticket out of my small hometown school. But being able to talk to my sister about those things was helpful. Ultimately, she didn't take some of my advice. She didn't do things that, the way I would have done them, but she did things the way that, she figured out for herself. And in doing so, she ultimately, I think, made the right choice for her in going to North Carolina A&T. And we had to engage in the, should I go to a HBCU or should I go to a, HPWI, historically predominantly white institution? And we talked about what my experience was like at a HPWI, but also in North Carolina. Most of the towns that have HPWIs also have HBCUs, and you can't really drive 30 minutes in any direction in central North Carolina without passing multiple institutions. And I think she benefited from that, and she participated in some programs in high school where she got to stay on college campuses and see what a residence hall looks like, to see what the cafeteria is like, to ask some of the questions that I and others in my family probably didn't know to ask, didn't realize were important things to consider when going off to school. And I think she would tell you, she's loved her college experience. And I enjoy seeing it from her perspective through her Instagram stories or her FaceTiming me while she's walking around campus, or at the greatest homecoming on earth, and all of those types of things. Yeah, so I hope that we are building a college-going culture in our family.
Thank you. That sounds exciting. Can you recall when you first knew you wanted to attend college?
Ooh, I think I was in elementary school, actually. Even though my immediate family didn't go off to school, there were a lot of elders in my community and a lot of mentors that I had, folks who had gone to college. Many of them had gone to HBCUs because they didn't have the opportunity to go. They couldn't go to some of the HPWIs in the state. And so I had a lot of people who lived in my home community in Kingville who went to Winston-Salem Teachers College, which is now, Winston-Salem State University, who went to North Carolina Teachers College, which is now North Carolina Central University, who went to Barber Scotia, which was a HBCU that unfortunately closed, but it was 30 minutes from my hometown, 25 minutes from my hometown. and they made sure to take youth groups to not really college visits, because that's not how they were billed or how they were talked about, or that's not how they were marketed, but it was, we had kind of youth civic organizations, or it was like the Order of the Eastern Stars and the Masons, and we also had the Elks Lodge that was in my home community, and we had church groups, church youth groups, and choirs and things like that. The NAACP, lots of those older folks who had gone off to college were the leaders in those organizations, or they started them up because they realized the need. And so folks like, Miss Brenda James Stenback, Mr. Titus Stenback, Vivian Pate, other folks in my community. And then I had some of my older cousins who were kind of like my mom's older siblings, who I call uncle and aunt, even though they're actually cousins. But they had gone off to college and moved away after college. And so I spent time visiting them in Maryland and the Washington, D.C. area, in New York when I would visit my grandmother. There were other relatives who had also gone to New York, and some of them had gone off to some HBCUs. And so I think I always wanted to go to college. If I had to remember a particular moment, I think it was, I can't remember what age I was or what grade I was in, but we went to Winston-Salem State and it was homecoming, or at least I think it was homecoming. It could have just been a regular football game, but to me the environment gave off like, this isn't just a regular Saturday football game. And I remember seeing, folks in their like fraternity and sorority gear. I remember seeing, the cheerleaders and the dancers, and the crowd. Everybody's wearing the school colors, and the band is, blasting away, playing away, and they're playing music that you were hearing on the radio and stuff like that. And there was the, just knowing about those. I think that's the moment. That's the first moment I remember being on a college campus in a football stadium. I don't remember a whole lot else about where else we went, where we ate, any of that stuff, but I remember being in the football stadium. And then I remember going to like MLK Day parades and homecoming parades that Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte did every year, and being excited and waiting for their band to come around the corner. Because in some of those parades, they're the larger city parades, and you see the civic organizations and the police and fire departments and things like that. But I remember we were really excited because you would hear the and everybody would be rocking. You were hoping the band, please stop in front of us and do something, and you're pretending that you're playing the drums, or that you're playing, saxophone or trumpet, or those types of things. So I think they helped foster the expectation that I was gonna go to college early on, by taking me on those trips and making sure I had exposure to some of those things, even though I didn't know at the time that they were priming me for college, nor did I know how I would pay for it or any of those, or what it actually meant to be in college. But college became a goal early on of mine.
So I think that goes into the next question. How did you prepare to be the first in your family to attend college?
Haphazardly. Kind of some by accident, but some by having the support of my parents, even though they didn't go to college. Once I kind of said I wanted to go to college, they were very encouraging, very supportive, having extended family and community members who knew about college and could answer questions, or who could just help prime me for wanting to go to college, exposing me, taking me to college campuses, those types of things. But as far as like actual preparation to be the first, I think some of it was like people fostered a natural curiosity that I had, and then once they realized that I had like some natural smarts or some natural aptitude and like some giftedness towards wanting to read and things like that, they helped encourage that. Churches taking up extra offerings and things like that to support me and other kids who wanted to participate in summer programs. Some of those community and civic organizations that I mentioned offering low cost or free programs or having kind of sponsorship scholarships for some of those summer programs or some of those summer trips and things like that. Some of those college, I guess college visits. I don't know what else to really call them. You know, those types of things. But as far as knowing I was going to be the first, I mean, I think the finances was the scariest part. The like making the grades and all of that. That was the easy part. It was it wasn't my job, but as a kid, like the expectation, you're gonna go to school and you're gonna try to do your best. Excuse me. And I was fortunate to have, I guess, people recognize that I was smart. I mean, I got the talks too much, needs to not, you know, bother other people after they finish their work, comments on all of my report cards and things like that. But having folks who took an interest in me and who pushed me to, you know, be my best or to try to live into my potential and all of that kind of stuff. And also to put some financial resources or their networks and things to work. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think you talked a little bit about this, but our next question is, how did your community support you in your decision to attend college?
I think once I said like I want to go to college, folks were really encouraging and like, yeah, you can go to college. And like when I wanted to participate in summer programs and things like that, and my parents couldn't afford to send me or didn't know that that was a worthy investment, having folks, either extended family or community members who were like, yeah, you should push for him to go to this, or how can we be of support? You know, I remember I was in 9th grade and had an English teacher, Mr. Holt, who announced that he was planning to take a group of students to England and France over the summer. And I really wanted to go. I went home, talked to my mom, and my mom was like, we can't afford that. And so I remember talking to like the director of the youth choir at church about it. And like, I was really excited, and I was like, I'm going on this trip. I'm gonna figure out a way to make it happen. And I was fortunate, and I'm still grateful to this day to have a community that rallied around kids who had some smarts, or, you know, most of the time in my community was rallying around kids that had athletics talent, but there was also, I think that gets more hype and people talk about that more because it's more visible, it's in the newspaper and things like that. But I remember, I mean, people in my community also supported me, like when I won like the geography bee in elementary school, and like there would be a little write-up in the newspaper, and family members and church would like cut it out, and like it would be on the bulletin board at church, and it would be like on my grandma's funeral, my parents, not funeral, refrigerator, you know, those types of things. And people in the neighborhood say, oh, I saw you in the paper, congratulations, you're so smart, whatever. Or people putting a little bit of change in your hand when they see you, like, keep it up, you know, encouraging that way. But as far as like specifically college, by the time I went off to the North Carolina School of Science and Math, a lot of folks in my hometown thought I already went to college because it's unusual to go to a residential public school, and North Carolina was the first to create theirs in the 80s, and many other states followed suit, but nobody knew other black folks from my community who went off somewhere that wasn't jail, that wasn't you just moved away. I don't think anybody that I know went off to like military school or anything like that. Boarding school wasn't a thing that people knew about. And so when you left home and you were in school, they just assumed you were in college. And so even when I would come home, people would ask, how's college? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm just going here for my junior and senior year. But because I had to take the SAT and you had to apply and be accepted and all of that, people just thought that was college. And so people were really encouraging, really supportive, but I don't know that they specifically said you should go to X school or go to this other school. But once I announced that I had been admitted and had gotten a full ride to Wake Forest, I actually came back from Durham at Science and Math and participated in Senior Awards Day at my home high school. And it's big day where they announce scholarships that people, all of the students who received scholarships, where they were going to college. And then there were also awards that were school specific that were given out around athletics, around other extracurriculars, around academics, and things like that. And people's parents usually came to that. I don't think that random people from the community went. It was mostly people's family and people's parents and guardians and folks who went. But once they announced that, then everybody was thinking that I physically got that amount of money. And so it was hey, let me hold some. I heard that you got, X number of thousands of dollars. And I'm no, it's a scholarship and it's actually paid. The school doesn't actually pay it out. It's the school giving it to themselves, trying to explain it like that and not really even knowing how to explain that stuff. But people were really supportive, really encouraging, and I think genuinely happy that somebody from our small town, from our home community, made it to college.
Thank you. So the next question is, what was the process like for you? And I'm going to ask, since you do have your bachelor's and your master's, and now you're working on a PhD, if you can kind of take us through what that process was like as a first-gen student, as you're preparing for that first degree, but then also after your consecutive degrees as well.
Yeah, so the process of being about to finish my
prepare
degree.
For college.
Okay. I think definitely going to science and math was one of the first steps, because again, in order to apply to go to the North Carolina School of Science and Math, had to take the SAT, had to write some essays, had to complete an application. A certain number of students from each congressional district in the state are admitted, and it's based on, representation, your population of that congressional district determines how many students in their student body could come from that congressional district. But that was a college prep environment, even though they didn't calculate GPAs and none of the classes were listed as honors or AP. It was billed as a college prep school, and it also was billed as all of these are courses that would prepare students to sit for the AP exam. And so Unfortunately, one of the, I guess, negatives, or one of the things that resulted from me going to science and math, if I had stayed at Albemarle High School um, and taken AP classes and taken the AP tests, the school system would have covered them because I was a student who qualified for free and reduced lunch. But because I was at science and math, they didn't pay for it right out. You could apply for like a reduced fee. But I think each AP test was like $150, and that meant $75 per test. My family couldn't afford to pay for those, that $75. Or if they would have paid for them, it would have had to come from somewhere. So it would have meant my mom borrowing money from somebody to pay for me to take these tests, but then having to figure out how to pay it back. And going to science and math, we weren't allowed to have a job. And part of being a publicly funded, it's part of the UNC school system. Part of it being publicly funded was that we were required to work one semester on campus each year, but it wasn't paid. It was called work service, but basically it was like our payment back to the state of North Carolina. We basically helped to keep the school afloat. And so we did what on college campuses are work study jobs or paid jobs. You did it because it was one of the requirements of being there at a publicly funded school. So the process was, had lots of teachers in high school who had PhDs, some who also taught at some of the neighboring colleges and universities or had formerly taught at some of the colleges and universities. A lot of the adults who lived in our residence halls with us were graduate students at Duke, at UNC, at North Carolina Central, at NC State, at Meredith, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was an extremely college prep, college going culture of this school, where it was like, oh, you went there. If you graduate from here, you're guaranteed to get admitted to most of the public schools, definitely in the state. But you know, folks were going off to the Ivies and making choices between which one to go to, or people. I can't say everybody got into every college that they applied to, but people were gonna go to college, and it was like a 100% success rate. And so, yeah, it was just a matter of which colleges were you going to apply to, and for me, who was going to give me the most money or the fullest package to attend their school. And I ended up applying early admission to Wake Forest because once I went and visited campus, saw the campus, I benefited from the diversity admissions recruiter was from my hometown. And so I remember our college night, you know, lots of colleges were set up in the gymnasium at their tables and booths. And then some colleges had like a private room where you could go in and have like one-on-one conversation with their admissions rep. And Wake Forest was one of those that had a private room. I wasn't even intending, this was my junior year, I wasn't even intending to go to talk to Wake Forest. It wasn't really on my radar. But once I read the list and saw that Marcus Ingram, who's from my hometown, who was quite a few years older than me, but who I knew his family, we kind of knew each other, but he was, you know, he had graduated with one of my aunts. And so he was much older than me, but I just went to say, hey, and to tell him, like, I told my mom that you were coming, and she said, make sure you go say hey to Marcus. And so we ended up, he was like, oh, sit down, you know, and it gave me the whole spiel of why I should look at Wake. And he asked, oh, what schools are you thinking about? And growing up in North Carolina, I grew up a fan of UNC, and so it was just like, if I'll go to college, I'm going to go to UNC because I like their football and basketball teams. It wasn't originally about the academic programs or anything like that, but I also knew UNC had a medical school. And so I was like, well, I want to go to med school, so I'm going to go to UNC, and I can just stay there all the way through medical school because I thought you had better chances of getting into somebody's graduate professional programs if you went to their school. You would already be able to build relationships and stuff like that. And that was still some of my, like, being a first gen, I didn't really know how graduate stuff, professional schools worked. So anyway, he convinced me to come for what I think at that time was called like Discovery Days. It was like a fall program. And one of my friends, by the time we got to our actually the spring of our junior year, no, I take that back. Fall of our senior year, he convinced me to go. And I had a car that was parked at my cousin's house, and she checked me out on the weekends and I could drive. And so he was like, hey, we can, we get a certain number of days that we can go for college visits. That's, again, part of the college going culture is that you could get days off class to go on college visits. There would be excused absences or whatever. And so the two of us went, I drove us down, and that was my first time on Wake's campus, even though I had been to Winston-Salem State. I had, my mom's dad had grown up in Winston-Salem and had lived down the street from campus and was back living in the city at that time. I had never stepped foot on Wake's campus. I never really knew where it was in the city. But once we got there, I fell in love, and I was like, I want to go here. I continued to talk to Marcus, and I ended up applying early decision and praying that I would get a good financial aid package. So I applied early in the fall by whatever that deadline, like October 15th, November 1st, something like that. It was super early, and I remember finding out October 8th, 2000, that December 8th, 2000, that I had been admitted for the class of 2001 because we would graduate in the spring. And then holding my breath for a couple months, waiting for a financial aid packet to come because I had no idea. I think Wake had just crossed the $30,000 threshold, and I knew my family couldn't afford that. Luckily, the financial aid packet worked out, had a combination of need-based and merit-based aid to have a full ride. Unfortunately, as a first-gen student, I didn't do everything that was expected. I lost some of the scholarships or got on probation and things like that just because I was trying to enjoy my college experience, and the goal had been go to college. Right. I was like, I'm here, I'm at college, yay, I made it. Mm-hmm. Not realizing like you gotta hit certain metrics to maintain scholarships, to get a GPA that allows you to keep getting that money each year. And I thought that because I had a 4-year scholarship, I didn't know anything about it's renewable each year. I know they said like, oh, you need to have this GPA, your first year, and then your sophomore and junior year, you needed to have, a different GPA. I just was enjoying college. I went to class, but I also like hung out way too much. I was on other people's campuses way too often because, again, North Carolina, you can't drive 30 minutes without being on somebody else's, campus. And I was visiting friends at UNC and at Duke and at A&T, et cetera. And so I actually left college. And then found out that Akela was pregnant with our oldest, James, my senior year. In the spring of my senior year, I found out. And I don't want to say I fell into like a depression, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I stopped going to classes. you know, I was trying to figure out like what are my next steps in life. Do I need to get a job? Do I stay for an extra semester to try to graduate? And I decided to get a job. So I left school without a degree, and at first struggled to find a job because most of them were requiring a bachelor's degree. And so I ended up going into Target's management training program. And I did that for a few years, a couple years actually. And in the summers, I was taking 1 or 2 classes because I think I had a total of like 9 or 12 hours that I needed to complete to have my degree. And I think it was 9 hours, and then I needed to retake a class to replace an F. And so I did that over the course of the next few summers and finished I was supposed to have graduated in May of 2005, and I got my degree in December of 2008. And by that time, I had been working for a few years. We were in Chapel Hill. My wife was about to finish her master's, and you know, she was very encouraging and like, hey, you need to finish this before I finish my degree so that we'll have opportunities. And so my family didn't originally know that I hadn't graduated college. You know, I never really said anything to anybody. I just like, yeah, I'm working, you know, and so they just assumed that, oh, he must have graduated since he's working. And so I only invited a handful of my family members to come to my college graduation because there was some shame in it, because there was like lots of hurrah around me going off to college and being pretty smart and all of those types of things. And I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to say like, I'm struggling a little bit. I'm not handling my business. Who do I talk to about these things? And academic advising at that time on my campus wasn't really invasive. Luckily, I had some pretty invasive, like Director of Multicultural Affairs, Dr. Barbie Oakes, Dr. Rick Hall, who is one of the deans of students doing student conduct, who also is my fraternity brother. My line brothers who were finishing degrees and going off to law school and grad school and, you know, these types of things, like, come on, bro, you gotta get out of here. You know, you're too smart, you got too much going for you to, you know, not finish this degree. And so I worked from 2005 until 2010. And when we moved to Chapel Hill, I took a job as the head wrestling coach at North Carolina School of Science and Math, because one of my mentors at Science and Math had been the wrestling coach, and he was leaving to take a job coaching softball at North Carolina Central and to work in their admissions office. And he was like, hey, I know you just moved back to town. I'm leaving this job. Would you be interested in being the head wrestling coach? And I'm like, Coach, I ain't wrestled since my sophomore year of college, doing club. How am I gonna be the head coach? And he was like, man, it's like riding a bike. You know, it'll come back to you. You can watch some videos on YouTube. I can send you, you know, some DVDs and stuff that I have. You can do this. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I need to be able to make some money while I'm doing this, and this will give me a chance to figure some things out. And so I, you know, emailed the athletic director, and she, you know, we scheduled an interview. I went and, you know, hyped myself up of like, yeah, I'm really excited to be, you know, the coach and all of that. And it actually ended up being a blessing because through talking to the students that were on my team and the managers, they were asking me questions about or sharing and asking for suggestions of family and other relationships, like their intimate relationships, boyfriend, girlfriend problems and issues that they were dealing with. asking me to write letters of recommendation for them to go to summer programs and for college, asking me how I made the decision, because they knew I went to science and math, like how did you ultimately decide to go to Wake Forest? Did you apply to other schools? Why not? What other schools were you considering? And I really enjoy engaging with students in that way. And so at the same time, I was taking some career assessments and stuff like that, like Strength Finders and MBTI and some other things through career services at Wake, because I found out they did stuff with alums as well. And so, and I also wasn't happy doing business related work. And, I was like, I'm finishing my degree. This is gonna open up opportunities. What do I wanna do with my life? And school counseling and education kept coming up on all of those assessments. So these are the types of careers that fit, your profile or your interests and your aptitudes and all of that kind of stuff. And so I looked into school counseling programs and spent a few months, a couple of days a week studying for the GRE. It got real when I scheduled the test, and I had to go to the testing center at North Carolina Central to take it. I took the GRE. I did okay. I don't think I did as. I left thinking I would have done better on this if I had taken it straight out of high school, because lots of the vocabulary and especially the math section was like high school, like things I had done in high school where I was still in geometry mode and algebra mode and those types of things. And so I applied to, we were trying to figure out, do we want to stay in North Carolina or do we want to get closer to the Chicago area where my wife was from? We didn't want to move all the way to Illinois, and so I applied to programs in the Indianapolis area and in North Carolina, and got into schools in both, but ultimately decided to go to Wake because they offered a full ride. And we were familiar with Winston-Salem. We still had friends there. We had, it was close to my family. We still had relationships, whereas Indianapolis area, we'd have been a few hours from her parents, but we didn't know anybody who lived in Indianapolis. And they only offered, in-state tuition and a half scholarship. And so ultimately we were like, I don't want to go into more debt. And so I went to Wake for their Master of Arts in Counseling program, and then was planning to be a school counselor in North Carolina, was considering getting rid of school counseling, and lots of my faculty, lots of my mentors recommended making the jump into higher ed. And so I applied for an assistant director of multicultural affairs position, and I had been doing a GA position that was almost like a full-time job, because I was working like more than 20 hours a week, closer to 30 hours a week in their it was called the Institute for Public Engagement, but it was basically doing community engagement, volunteer outreach work with students and K-12 schools. And I was really enjoying the education side of things and working with students. And I hit the ceiling of what I could do in that role with only a master's degree. And the director left, and I ended up getting the promotion to interim director. And as I was having conversations with my longtime mentor, who went from being director of multicultural affairs to assistant provost for diversity and inclusion, I was asking her hey, I'm thinking about getting a PhD, but I also know that we're about to launch a search for a new director of multicultural affairs. Should I apply? Would I have a decent chance of getting it? And she was like, well, the preferred qualification is PhD. And she was like, if it came down to you and somebody who had the credential, more than likely the committee would go with the person that has the credential, because that's kind of just how higher ed works in some ways. And so I was applying to PhD programs. And I wasn't location bound at that point because we were willing to move to different places, but talked to mentors again, talked to some folks through who are like some of the faculty and founders of the Social Justice Training Institute, and several of them had either worked at Iowa State or knew people who had gotten their PhDs at Iowa State. They knew I was looking in like an equity and justice minded program, and they suggested, look at Iowa State. And I was like, Iowa State? I don't even know where Iowa is. Why would I go there? And then I looked up the program and saw some of the alums and stuff like that. And I didn't need to take the GRE again because I was still within that 5-year window. So I applied like right before my GRE scores were going to expire, because it was they said they reviewed applications on rolling admission. So I looked at schools that review applications on a rolling admission cycle, so I wouldn't have to take the GRE again, because the GRE had changed within that 5-year window, and I didn't want to take another standardized test and pay money to take it when I'm like, these scores still work, let me apply to schools that I don't have to spend another whatever, I don't even remember how much it costs now. But I got into Iowa State, I got into UNCG, and a couple other places, and ultimately we decided to come to Ames, Iowa, to Iowa State. My partner and I, we came to visit in April. There was like a sleet storm while we were here, and I committed to coming here, send off all the paperwork. I'd had some phenomenal conversations with Dr. Rosie Perez and Dr. Brian Burt when I came to visit. I met Dr. Natasha Kroom and sat down, had a conversation with Dr. Daniel Spikes and some others, and they told me about like the work that they were doing, the community they were trying to build within the School of Ed. And most of them had just gotten to Iowa, besides Dr. Kroom, who had finished her PhD here and went straight into a faculty role in the department. But everybody else was in their first year. But they seemed to be really excited, and they were like, the school is rebuilding. We have, lots of young, new assistant professors. It was one of the most diverse School of Ed faculties that I saw. So I ultimately made the decision to come here.
Thank you. We're glad you're here.
I think I'm still glad to be here.
So we're gonna, this is more about what it feels like to be a Christian student. So what does being the first in your family to attend college mean to you?
Now I think it's more important than I realized, because having seen my baby sister go off to college, and having been able to engage in some conversations with her about the college application process, the search process, and now that she's, so close to completing her degree, we might be graduating both this year, and so I think that would be really impactful for our extended family, and I think it would just be amazing to graduate, for her to have her undergraduate cap and gown, for me to get my poofy hat and my velvet robe, and to potentially go back to North Carolina at some point for us to have a joint cookout and gathering to celebrate, completion of these degrees. I think it has become more powerful than I realized when I was coming out of high school. I had no idea that, I could be a role model for other folks in my family. And now especially I have kids who've grown up on college campuses, like literally living on UNC's campus. And then when I was finishing grad school and working at Wake and now here at Iowa State, like going to campus is like a regular day for them. And I think that they'll just be in such a better position than I was in the college application process, having two parents who have multiple degrees and who work on a college campus and can walk them through these processes or set them up for success. And we've been able to provide them access to opportunities and things that I didn't even know existed when I was in elementary, middle, and even high school. And some I didn't find out about in undergrad. I found out when I got to grad school and people were talking about, you know, McNair and other scholarship programs that, you know, pay for graduate education. I didn't know that that was a thing. But having my kids know about those programs, having my kids be able to come to campus and hear speakers or to participate in, you know, robotics and engineering workshops, and having the Bug Zoo come to their preschool, elementary school, having them, you know, doing after school programs and stuff with Iowa State students. And it's just completely, I did not see myself in this position, but I'm glad that I am, because I think it will change trajectory for my future generations.
Which is a great segue into our next question. What legacy do you want to leave?
At Iowa State or in the world?
You can frame it however you would like.
I mean, I think specifically at Iowa State, as a first gen, about to be doctor from the higher ed administration program, one of the things that I've tried to do as somebody who cares about equity, who cares about transforming college campuses, providing opportunities, or not just access to opportunities, but actual like equity in opportunities for students of color, for low-income students or students from low-income communities, under-resourced schools, first-gen students, is important to me. And one of the things that I've tried to do since coming to Ames, since coming to Iowa State, was to like shine a light on the inequities that exist, to shine a light on the possibilities for students of color, for first-gen students, for students from low-income, under-resourced communities and schools, to force Iowa State in very public and visible ways to reckon with its history, to live into its stated mission, to do what it said that it was going to do when it recruited students and their families to become part of Cyclone Nation. So my legacy, I hope that through some of the activism I've done, through some of the workshops I've facilitated, through, you know, committees that I've served on, through, you know, different things that I've done, just being here, being myself, unapologetically Black, repping North Carolina, Raise Up, all of that will change things to be better than they were when I got here. So future students of color, future first gen, students from low income, under-resourced communities, students from other areas of the country who didn't grow up in Iowa, when they come to Iowa State, when they come to Ames, policies will be changed. Practices will be different. Their interactions, their experiences will be better. That's what I'm hoping. I think sometimes I get caught up in this place isn't what it could be, this place isn't what it should be, and forget to like zoom out and think, okay, when I got here in 2015, what was this place like? How have I been able to be in community and work to build community with folks who are different than me, who have shared identities with me? How have we been able to build solidarity to push collectively to transform this place, and how is it different? Whether the university will ever say this is because of Lucha, this is because of, you know, Wesley and Maria and Alade and Nancy and Juan and Monica and, you know, Itzel and other folks, like whether they actually will ever say that doesn't matter. If they change the policies, if they change the practices, if this place is better, I'm good.
Thank you. So next question, what are you most proud of to this point in your life?
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, I think what I'm most proud of is like breaking some of these generational chains that, like I said, knowing that my family was forcibly brought to the United States from somewhere on the African continent, not knowing where they came from, not knowing where they're going, where they were going, where they were being brought to, not having access to their humanity, to now being about to finish a PhD and be called Dr. Harris. For me, that's powerful. You know, there's, you know, the images of the shirt that says, "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams," and I mean, I fully believe that. You know, my ancestors were able to endure ridiculous, horrific things and still persevere and still teach their kids, my, you know, great grandparents and grandparents and parents, you know, to pass down like pride in who you are, in spite of what the world would try to tell you that you are, in spite of the anti-blackness that exists and still exists, you know, in 2019. For me to be able to help raise some black kids who are proud to be black, who use their voices to push for what's right, to call out things at school, and for me to be able to do the same thing and to be unapologetic in it. I think that's what I'm the proudest of. I can't wait to walk across that stage and get that, you know, diploma cover that doesn't have the diploma in it, but it's gonna be my diploma cover, the poofy hat. Yeah, I'm excited about that, so that my kids will see that. And hopefully a number of my family members from North Carolina will be able to see that and to know that the seeds they planted in me as a kid, and know that encouragement and all of that like has finally bore fruit in the form of like, this will be our degree. And I'm coming back home. I gotta get my T-shirt ready, you know, so I can put on for my city, as Jeezy says. Take it back to the little A.
Very nice. So we're getting down to our last couple questions.
Okay.
What advice would you share for current and future first-generation college students?
For current and future first-generation students, be unapologetically you. You earned your way to Iowa State or whatever university you're at, just like everybody else. Now that you're here, what are you going to do with it? How can you take advantage of all of the opportunities that exist on campus? How can you put yourself out there in ways that will often be uncomfortable? How can you ask for the help, the support, the resources that you are paying for? How can you get access to those? How can you use those? How can you get what you came for ultimately by completing your degree? And how can you do that while maintaining the largest amount, the fullest amount of your sanity in the process? Don't let folks make you feel like you're less than, like you don't belong here, like you didn't earn your way here the same way that they did, because you did. You can do this. You wouldn't be here if you couldn't do it. It's hard. You have to put in the work. You have to grind. You have to pull those all-nighters. You have to go to supplemental instruction, and there's tutors that are here that Christy and others will pay for. Folks got resources. There are tons of resources to provide what you need while you're here, but you gotta ask for it, demand it, whatever you need to do to do what you came to do, and that's ultimately to get the degree.
Thank you. So I know we talked about you're going to share some things on your phone, so if you want to cue those up. And I just ask that you point it towards the camera as you talk about it.
Okay. And hopefully there's no glare. So this is me and my 7 line brothers. The semester after we pledged Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, we helped to charter our chapter on campus. And without their support, encouragement, they are some of my role models. They're my peers. But amongst us, there's doctors, medical doctors, PhDs, educators, lawyers, business people, accountants, a former NFL player. And so they have been some of my biggest supporters, some of my biggest advocates, some of the biggest reminders of what we came to do, that we are achievers, and some of the best friends that I made in college, and who've continued to be not just friends, but my brothers. They're the uncles to my kids, and they're continuing to push me now to get what I came for in finishing this degree. And then this is my 2 sisters and my kids at my youngest sister's high school graduation. And I chose this picture because these are folks that I hope to be a role model for, and my younger siblings and my own children. My youngest brother's not in this picture, and my niece is not in the picture. But I'm hoping that, what I've done by coming to college and finishing degrees will influence not only the folks in this picture, but the kids that they have, and the kids that they have, and the kids that they have, and we'll set our family on a new trajectory. And then the last picture I have is a picture of me, my wife, and our kids at Wake Forest University last summer in front of Maya Angelou Hall. Dr. Angelou was, I wasn't fortunate enough or smart enough to try to take her class when I was an undergrad there. But knowing that this is, if I'm not mistaken, the first building that's named after a black person at Wake Forest University, when some of the money from that helped to support the institution at its old campus came from the literal sale of enslaved African peoples. It was important for us to take a picture in front of the building, but it also is the campus where my wife and I met. And whether or not our kids go to Wake Forest or not, the expectation that we've set